The motel was called the Desert Star Inn, which was a lie on 2 counts. There were no stars visible from my window, just the orange smear of the Bakersfield highway lights, and it wasn't an inn. It was a row of 12 rooms off Route 99 with a vending machine that only dispensed Sprite and a parking lot that smelled like old motor oil. I'd been there 4 days. I hadn't left once. I was eating crackers from a sleeve I'd bought at the gas station next door, the kind with the peanut butter already inside. They were stale. I kept eating them anyway because I wasn't hungry. I was just doing something with my hands. My phone was on the nightstand. I kept looking at it. The men from Callaway Construction hadn't called again. That was worse than if they had. The last call was 2 days ago from a number I didn't recognize, and the guy on the other end didn't say much, just that Marcus Callaway wanted his $40,000 back, and that the window for working this out quietly was closing. He said quietly, the way people say it when they mean the opposite. I knew what I'd done. I'm not going to explain all of it, but the short version is that I'd been keeping 2 sets of records for about 8 months, skimming small amounts from project accounts, and then I had a bad 4 weeks at a poker room in Fresno, and the amounts stopped being small. $40,000 is a lot of money to disappear from a mid-sized construction firm. It's also, it turns out, exactly the amount that makes a man like Marcus Callaway stop treating it as an HR problem. So that was my situation. Crackers, Sprite, 4 walls, and a parking lot I couldn't walk through without checking both directions first. I'd been on my laptop most of the day, not doing anything useful. I'd looked at bus routes to Phoenix twice and closed the tab twice. I'd checked my bank account like that was going to change something. I had a little under $3,000, which sounds like more than it is when you're trying to disappear. I found the listing around 11 at night. It was on a forum I'd ended up on through a chain of links I couldn't fully reconstruct. One of those private job boards, the kind you need an account to see, and I had an account from years ago when I was doing contract security work between construction jobs. I hadn't logged in for maybe 3 years. The listing was near the top. Posted 6 days prior, it said, security monitor position, remote facility, Mojave Desert, 10 days on site. $12,000 cash upon completion. Housing provided. No prior clearance required. Serious inquiries only. There was a contact email and a set of coordinates. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at the coordinates on a map. They pointed to a stretch of desert about 90 miles southeast of Bakersfield, out past Mojave town, in the kind of terrain where you don't end up by accident. I should have asked more questions. I know that now. I didn't ask any. Not one. I didn't email to ask what the facility was, or who owned it, or why they were paying $12,000 for a watch job that any licensed security guard could do for $1,200. I told myself it was probably some private tech operation, maybe a data center, the kind of company that likes its location kept quiet for liability reasons. Weird, but not impossible. Rich people do weird things with remote property. Mostly, I thought, 90 miles is 90 miles. The men from Callaway Construction were looking for me in Bakersfield. They weren't going to look for me in the middle of the Mojave Desert. I emailed the contact address, said I was available and interested, gave my first name and my old security certification number. I got a reply in under 10 minutes. That was a little fast, but I was already past caring about details like that. The reply had an address, a start date, 2 days out, and one line at the bottom that said, "Bring enough for 10 days. There are no stores nearby." I packed that night. I didn't have much. A duffel bag with clothes, my laptop, a phone charger, a flashlight I found in the bottom of my bag from some job 2 years ago. I grabbed the crackers. I had a paperback I'd been half reading, something I'd found under the bed when I checked in, left behind by whoever stayed there before me. I took that too. I checked out at 6 in the morning, paid cash for the 4 nights, and loaded everything into my car. My car is a 2009 Honda Accord with 160-something thousand miles on it. The AC works on the passenger side better than the driver's side. There's a rattle somewhere behind the dashboard that I've never been able to locate, and it gets worse above 65. I drove 68 the whole way because I needed to make time, and I couldn't afford to think too hard about the rattle. The highway was empty once I got past the edge of town. I mean, really empty. I passed a few semis early on, a couple of pickups, and then basically nothing. The landscape went flat and pale and stayed that way. Scrub brush, cracked dirt, the occasional billboard for something nobody out here needed. The mountains to the west got smaller in my mirrors and then disappeared. I had the radio on for a while, a classic rock station out of Bakersfield that faded out around 40 miles in. After that, it was just the rattle and the road noise and the AC doing its best. I wasn't thinking about much. That's the truth. I was thinking about the road and the coordinates on my phone, and the fact that I hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. I was not thinking about why a facility in the middle of the Mojave needed a security guard badly enough to post on a private forum and pay $12,000 for 10 days. I was not thinking about what kind of operation prefers to hire through an obscure online listing instead of through a proper agency. I was definitely not thinking about why they'd responded to my email in 10 minutes at 11 at night. I was thinking about 90 miles. The turnoff wasn't marked. I almost missed it. Just a gap in the scrub where a dirt road started, barely wide enough for the car. I had to slow down to about 15, and the Accord complained about every rock. The ridge came up on my left, this jagged line of dark rock that looked like it had been dropped there, and the road curved around the base of it. Then the building appeared. Low. Concrete. No windows I could see from the road. It sat flat against the base of the ridge like it had been built to avoid being noticed from the air. One steel door in the front, painted the same gray as the concrete so you'd almost miss it. No signage, no company name. A single light fixture above the door. Off. A small camera mounted above that on. I pulled up and sat in the car for a second with the engine running. It was quiet. Not just quiet the way places are quiet. Actually quiet. The kind where you become aware of your own breathing. The desert out here had a quality to it. This flat brightness even under the overcast sky that made everything look slightly washed out. I told myself it was fine. Remote data storage, probably. Server farms need to be climate controlled, which is easier in dry desert air. The concrete made sense. The location made sense. Companies pay premiums for security in places like this because there's no one else around to notice if something goes wrong. That last part, I maybe should have sat with a little longer. I turned the engine off. Got out. The heat hit me immediately, dry and total, the kind that makes your eyes feel like they're drying out. I grabbed my duffel from the back seat and walked toward the steel door. The camera tracked me the whole way. The door opened before I knocked. That was a little weird. Not impossible. Guy was probably watching the camera feed from inside. But still. I had my hand up, ready to knock, and the door just swung inward, and there he was. Timothy Torres. That was his name, he told me about 30 seconds later. He was stocky, medium height, the kind of guy you'd forget the moment he left a room. Thinning gray hair combed flat against his head. Pale eyes, broad nose, a face that had no particular expression on it. He was wearing a plain collared shirt and khaki slacks, which felt like an odd choice for a desert bunker in the middle of nowhere. But I didn't say anything about that. Andy Padilla, I said. He nodded like I'd confirmed something he already knew, then stepped back to let me in. The inside was cold. Not uncomfortable cold, just immediately and noticeably cooler than outside, which, after that parking lot heat, felt like stepping into a grocery store. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, the kind of hallway that goes on a little longer than it needs to. It smelled like dust and something faintly metallic, like old wiring. There was a hum coming from somewhere deeper in the building, low and steady. I felt it more than heard it, kind of in my chest. Timothy Torres walked ahead of me without looking back, which I took as a signal to follow. He had a flat, unhurried way of moving, like a man who had done this exact thing many times, and found it neither interesting nor unpleasant. We passed a few closed doors. No labels on them. The hallway turned once and opened into a small room. A security office, I figured, because there was a desk and a bank of monitors showing grainy black and white feeds of various corridors. A rolling chair, a landline phone, a half-full coffee maker on a folding table against the wall. He stopped and turned around, reached into a manila envelope he'd been carrying that I hadn't noticed until just then, and pulled out 3 things. He set them on the desk in a row. A key card, white plastic, no markings. A flashlight, black, heavy, the long kind with multiple batteries. A laminated sheet of paper. The key card gets you through any interior door except the server room during a cooling cycle, he said. Flat voice, no accent I could place. The flashlight is for the maintenance corridor on the east side. The overhead lights there are on a motion sensor and they're slow. You'll want it. I picked up the key card and put it in my shirt pocket. I picked up the flashlight and clicked it on, then off. Worked fine. The facility, he said. And then he gave me the cover story. Decommissioned Cold War bunker, built in the late 50s, used through the 80s, then mothballed. Repurposed about 4 years ago for Amazon logistics data storage, backup server infrastructure, he said, redundancy systems for regional distribution data. The server fans ran loud and constant, which was normal. The cooling systems ran hard because servers generate heat and the desert doesn't help. The building managed its own climate. My job was to watch the feeds, walk the perimeter twice per shift, log anything unusual in the binder on the desk, and not touch anything I wasn't told to touch. Standard stuff. I'd done security work before a couple of years back, at a lumber yard in Fresno. Different scale, same basic idea. Watch things. Write things down. Don't let people in who shouldn't be in. Then he picked up the laminated sheet and held it out to me. These are the operational rules, he said. They're non-negotiable. You agree to them as a condition of payment. I took the sheet. There were 5 rules, printed in a plain font, bolded at the header. Facility operational protocol. Security personnel. He read them to me while I read along, which was a little unnecessary, but I let it go. No entering the server room during a blue light cooling cycle. The server room entrance had a light strip above the door. If it was cycling blue, the room was in active cool down, and the pressure differential made entry a safety issue. That one made sense. No answering any phone that rings in the cafeteria. The cafeteria was down the hall, he said. And the landlines in there were old infrastructure that hadn't been fully decommissioned. They occasionally rang due to line bleed from the server systems. Answering them could interfere with active data processes. That one was a little more of a stretch, but okay. No adjusting the ventilation above or below 68 degrees. Climate stability was critical for the servers. The thermostat in the security office controlled the office only, not the server environment, but there was a shared intake and any fluctuation could cascade. Fine. No making eye contact with any janitor in a gray jumpsuit. He said this one the same way he said all the others. Flat, procedural, like it was just another line item. The janitorial staff worked on a separate contract and had a specific protocol for moving through the facility. Eye contact initiated a verbal exchange requirement under their union agreement, and verbal exchanges with security during active shifts created a documentation burden. It was easier for everyone if security and janitorial simply didn't interact directly. I looked up from the sheet when he said that one. He was already looking at me, waiting. I looked back down. No staring at the monitors for more than 10 consecutive minutes. Screen fatigue caused attention degradation. Security personnel were required to look away from the feeds every 10 minutes to maintain observational accuracy. That was it. 5 rules. Any questions? He said. It wasn't really a question. No, I said. He nodded, picked up the manila envelope. There's a cot in the back room, a bathroom at the end of the hall. Cafeteria has a vending machine and a microwave. I'll be on site for the first hour, then off. Number for facility management is on the binder. He paused. You won't need it. He left. I heard his footsteps go down the hall, heard a door open and close, and then it was just me and the hum. I set the laminated sheet on the desk and read through it again. The janitor one was the weird one, obviously. I'd heard stranger liability justifications from site managers, though. Construction sites have rules that make no sense until someone explains the lawsuit that created them. I filed it away as that kind of thing and didn't think about it much more. The first day was nothing. The second day was nothing. I ate vending machine chips and a gas station sandwich I'd brought in a bag. Slept on the cot in the back room, which had a thin mattress and smelled like industrial cleaner. I walked the perimeter when I was supposed to. Logged nothing in the binder because there was nothing to log. The feed showed empty hallways. The hum was constant. I got used to it the way you get used to a refrigerator running. After a while, you only notice it when it changes. I called Jacqueline on the second morning just to check in. Told her I had work, that I was fine, that I'd explain later. She said okay, in the way she says, okay, when she doesn't believe me but isn't going to push. That's her. I told her I'd call again in a few days. I kept thinking about the men from Bakersfield, whether they'd checked the motel, whether they'd talked to anyone who knew me. Out here, though, it was hard to feel like any of that was real. The desert has a way of making everything feel very far away. I was in a concrete box in the middle of nowhere, and nobody knew where I was. That was almost relaxing, in a grim kind of way. Third night, I was sitting in the rolling chair watching the feeds when I noticed I was sweating. I looked at the thermostat on the wall. It was a basic digital unit, white plastic, mounted next to the door. It read 82 degrees. I looked at it for a second, then looked at the small keypad underneath it, the one that controlled the settings, and remembered that Timothy Torres had not given me a code for that. I tried 0000. Nothing. I tried 1, 2, 3, 4. Nothing. I tried a few more combinations that seemed like the kind of thing a facility manager would use, and none of them worked. The room was warm and getting warmer, and I had no way to fix it from where I was sitting. I got up and went looking for the manual override. The laminated sheet hadn't mentioned one, but facilities like this always have them. I'd worked enough construction sites to know that every system has a bypass somewhere, usually in the worst possible location, usually unlabeled. I grabbed the flashlight off the desk and went out into the hallway. The maintenance corridor was behind a plain gray door at the far end of the main hall, past the cafeteria. I'd walked by it a few times, but never opened it. It was on the sheet as out of scope for my patrol route, which I'd taken to mean storage or mechanical, nothing to worry about. Now I had a reason to worry about it. The door opened easy. No lock, just a handle. The corridor behind it was narrow, concrete walls painted over in the same off-white as everything else, with exposed conduit running along the ceiling. Fluorescent tubes overhead, one of them flickering at the far end. The floor was bare concrete, slightly damp-looking. The air in there was cooler than the office, which was a good sign. I figured the HVAC equipment was somewhere along this stretch, and I'd find a panel, maybe a manual dial, something I could adjust without a keypad code. I started walking. The corridor went straight back, maybe 60 feet. There were a few metal doors on either side, all locked, all without labels, and a junction box mounted on the wall about halfway down that turned out to be electrical, not ventilation. I kept going. That's when I saw the janitor. He was at the far end of the corridor, maybe 20 feet ahead of me, pushing a mop across the floor in slow, even strokes. Gray jumpsuit. The mop bucket was one of those yellow plastic rolling ones, the kind with the built-in wringer. He had his back mostly to me, head down, just working the mop left to right, left to right. I stopped walking. The rule came back to me immediately. I didn't have to think about it. It just surfaced, the way important things do when your body already knows something is wrong. No eye contact with any janitor in a gray jumpsuit. That was the exact wording. I remembered it clearly because when I'd first read it, I'd thought it was the strangest one on the list. Stranger even than the phone rule. Now I was standing in a narrow concrete corridor with nowhere to go except past him or back the way I came, and going back meant the office kept getting hotter. I looked down at my boots. They were scuffed brown work boots. Left one had a small scrape across the toe from a job site about 8 months ago. I stared at that scrape and started walking. Kept my pace even. Didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just walked like I had somewhere to be and wasn't thinking about anything in particular. He kept mopping. The sound of it was wet and slow. The bucket wheels made a faint squeak on the concrete every time he pulled it forward. I got within about 10 feet of him, and the cold hit me. Not a draft. Not the ventilation kicking on. Just cold, sudden and total, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. The kind of cold that gets into your back teeth. I was sweating from the overheated office, and it hit me all at once, and I kept walking. Eyes on my boots. Left foot, right foot. The cold got worse as I got closer. Peaked somewhere right beside him. I was maybe 3 feet to his left when I passed. And then I was past him and still walking, and the cold started to fall away behind me. He didn't say anything, didn't react at all that I could tell. Just kept moving the mop. I didn't look back. There was a ventilation panel about 15 feet past him, exactly where I should have looked first. Mounted low on the wall. Gray metal cover with 4 screws. I crouched in front of it, got 2 of the screws out with a dime from my pocket, and found the manual damper lever inside. I adjusted it toward max airflow and put the cover back. Took maybe 4 minutes. The whole time I was aware of the mopping sounds behind me, that slow, wet rhythm, the occasional squeak of the bucket wheels. I didn't turn around once. I walked back the same way I came, eyes down. He was still there, still working, still facing, mostly away. I passed him again and the cold hit again, same as before. Same peak right at the point closest to him. Then I was through the gray door and back in the main hall, and I let the door close behind me. My hands were shaking a little. Not a lot. Enough that I noticed. I went back to the security office, sat down in the rolling chair, and took a breath. The room still felt warm, but I figured the damper adjustment would take a few minutes to do anything. I looked at the monitors. That's when I saw the clock on the bottom right corner of the screen. 23:14. I'd left at 23:02. 12 minutes. The rule was 10. I sat there for a second just looking at the number. Then I looked at the feeds. They weren't showing the server rooms. The top left monitor, the one that was supposed to be the east server corridor, was showing a room I recognized immediately. Low ceiling, wood-paneled walls, a bed with a blue comforter I'd left half kicked off when I'd checked out 3 days ago. The Starlight Motel on Union Avenue in Bakersfield. My room. The room I'd been hiding in. 2 men were standing over the bed. One was heavyset, dark jacket, looking at something on the floor. The other one was standing near the window with his arms crossed. I didn't recognize either of them, but I didn't need to. I knew what they were there for. I stared at that feed for a second, then looked at the one next to it. It had switched too. That monitor was supposed to cover the west loading dock. Instead, it was showing a kitchen, small, clean yellow curtains over the window above the sink, a round table with 4 chairs. I knew that kitchen. I'd eaten cereal at that table probably 1,000 times growing up. Jacqueline was sitting at it. She had her arms pulled in close, and she was crying. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind where you can't really tell from a distance except for the way her shoulders were moving. I looked at the background. There was a figure standing near the hallway door. Gray jumpsuit, facing her. Where the face should have been, there was nothing. Just flat and wrong, like someone had taken an eraser to it. I didn't move for a while. The feeds just stayed there. No flicker, no cut. The 2 men in my motel room, Jacqueline at the table, the gray figure behind her. I sat in the rolling chair with the flashlight still in my hand, and I looked at all of it. The rules weren't about the building. That's what I understood then, sitting there in the warm security office with the hum of the servers in the walls. They weren't safety protocols for working in a decommissioned bunker. They were something else. Every rule on that laminated sheet connected to something. And breaking one didn't just affect what happened to me in here. It reached out. It touched things. I'd been watching the monitors for 12 minutes, 2 minutes over, and now the monitors were showing me exactly the things I was most afraid of. I kept looking at Jacqueline's kitchen, at the figure behind her. It wasn't moving, just standing there, patient. The heat was the first thing. Not a gradual climb, not the kind of warm you adjust to. It just hit 90 and stayed there, and the security office went from uncomfortable to genuinely bad in maybe 20 minutes. I had my flannel unbuttoned and I was sweating through the shirt underneath it, the rolling chair stuck to the backs of my thighs. The little desk fan I'd found in the corner was doing nothing useful, just pushing hot air in a slow circle. I kept my eyes off the monitors. That was deliberate. I'd already been over the limit once tonight, and I wasn't going back. I looked at the wall, at the floor, at the laminated rule sheet I'd set face down on the desk, because I didn't want to read it again. I already knew what was on it. I'd been running the rules through my head for the last 10 minutes anyway, turning them over, trying to figure out which ones I'd actually broken and which ones I'd just bent. 2, I figured. Definitely 2. The monitor thing. The janitor thing, depending on how strict you were about what counted as eye contact. I'd looked at his boots. Did that count? I didn't know. I was hoping it didn't. The thermostat on the wall read 91 now. I checked it twice. The HVAC was locked. I already knew that. I'd found that out in the maintenance corridor, and the override panel needed a code I didn't have. And Torres hadn't left me a number to call, hadn't left me anything except the key card and the flashlight and the laminated sheet. I was starting to think that was intentional. Not in a practical way, like he'd forgotten, in a different kind of way that I didn't want to think about directly. I drank the last of the water from the bottle I'd brought in from the car. Warm. It tasted like plastic. Then the phone rang. Not in the office. There was no phone in the office. It came from down the hall, from the direction of the cafeteria, and it rang with the exact specific ringtone Jacqueline used on her cell. That little descending 4-note thing she'd had set for years. The one she used because she could hear it from 2 rooms away. I knew that ringtone the way you know a song from when you were a kid. You don't think about it. You just know it. I stood up. I stood there for a second, not moving because I knew the rule. I knew it clearly. It was on the sheet. Don't answer any phone that rings in the cafeteria. That was the exact wording. Not, be careful answering, or check who's calling first. Don't answer it, full stop. The phone rang again. Jacqueline's ringtone. 4 notes, descending. I was already in the hallway. I'm not going to pretend I thought it through. I didn't. I just moved, and the hallway was dark except for the emergency strips along the floor, and the phone kept ringing, and I followed it. The cafeteria door was propped open with a rubber wedge. Inside it smelled like old coffee and industrial cleaner. The chairs were all stacked on the tables. The vending machines along the far wall were dark. There was a wall phone near the service window, an old institutional beige one with a coiled cord, and it was ringing. I got my hand on the receiver. I stood there holding it, not lifting it, just holding it. The plastic was warm. The ringing stopped. The second my hand touched it, and for a second I thought that was it. It was over. I'd gotten there too late, or the thing had given up or whatever. Then it started again. 1 ring. Right in my hand. The rule was right there in my head. Don't answer it. I answered it. Jacqueline, I said. She was already screaming when the line connected. not screaming like she was hurt, screaming like she was terrified, which is a different sound. And I knew the difference because I'd heard her scared before, back when we were kids. And this was that same voice just coming out of a grown person. She said there was a man in her house. She said he was in the hallway. She said he didn't have a face. Jacqueline, listen to me. Andy, he's just standing there. He's not moving. He's just... Get out of the house. Go out the back. Go to the neighbors. Just get out. He's between me and the door. He's... The line went dead. Not a click. Not static. Just gone, like the call had never happened. I stood there with the receiver against my ear, listening to nothing. The coiled cord hung loose. The cafeteria was completely quiet except for the hum from the walls, which was the servers, which had been there the whole time, which I'd stopped noticing 2 days ago. I set the receiver back on the cradle. I stood there. Here's the thing about the moment when something clicks into place. It doesn't feel like a revelation. It doesn't feel like anything dramatic. It just feels like you were looking at a picture sideways, and now you're looking at it straight. And the only difference is, you can't go back to not seeing it. That's what happened in the cafeteria. I just stood there, and I saw it straight. The bunker wasn't a data storage site. I'd told myself that story because Torres had handed it to me, and I'd been desperate enough to take it. But there were no servers in those racks, or if there were, that wasn't the point of them. The monitors weren't security feeds. They were something else. They'd been showing me my motel room. They'd been showing me Jacqueline's kitchen. They'd been showing me the exact things I was most afraid of losing. And I'd been sitting in front of them for 3 nights, letting that happen. The embezzlement. The debt. The $40,000 I'd taken from Reyes Construction because I'd been in over my head, and I'd panicked, and I'd made it worse. Jacqueline didn't know about any of that. I'd kept her out of it because I didn't want her to know what kind of person I'd become, and whatever was in this building had found that and used it. It had found every ugly thing I'd been carrying, and it had been feeding on it since the moment I walked through the steel door. The rules on that sheet, the rules Torres had handed me like they were standard safety protocols. Don't watch the monitors too long. Don't answer the cafeteria phone. Don't adjust the temperature. Don't look at the janitor. Every single one of those rules was a limit, a boundary. Not for my safety exactly, but for how much the thing could pull out of me at once. They were portion control. And I'd broken 2 of them, maybe 3. And now the monitors were showing me Jacqueline with a faceless man in her kitchen, and the phone was ringing with her ringtone, and the building was 91 degrees and climbing. I thought about Torres, the way he'd handed me the sheet without explaining it, the way he'd said the rules were non-negotiable if I wanted to be paid, which was a specific way to phrase it. Like the payment was the only thing that would make a person follow rules they didn't understand. He'd known I was desperate. He'd known exactly what kind of person to put in this building. I didn't stay in the cafeteria. If the thing was anchored somewhere, it was the server room. That was where the hum came from, where the blue cooling light came from, where the rules pointed everything toward. Don't enter during a blue light cycle. That was the first rule, the one at the top of the sheet, the one Torres had said twice. Which meant that was where it mattered most, which meant that was where I had to go. I went back into the hallway, and I ran. The doors hit the wall and the blue light came in all at once. Cold. Not cool, not air-conditioned, not the kind of cold you get from a broken thermostat. I mean cold that had no business existing in a building that had been 91 degrees 30 seconds ago. My lungs pulled in one breath and my chest seized up like I jumped into a lake in January. I stopped moving for just a second, stood there in the doorway with my hand still on the doorframe. The mist was already at my feet, rolling slow, knee-height, the kind of thing you see in bad horror movies and think looks fake. It didn't look fake. It was liquid nitrogen vapor, and it moved the way cold things move, which is heavy and low and patient. My boots disappeared into it. I could feel the temperature through the soles. And there were no server racks. That was the thing that stopped me more than the cold. I'd built up this whole picture in my head. Rows of black towers, blinking lights, cable management, the kind of setup you see in tech company photos. Nothing. The room was wide and mostly empty. Concrete walls, concrete floor, the blue strobe light coming from somewhere overhead. And in the middle of the room, taking up maybe a third of the space, was the thing. I don't have a better word for it than mass. It was big. It was translucent, sort of, the way a jellyfish is translucent. You can see through it, but you're not sure what you're seeing. It pulsed, slow and rhythmic, like it was breathing, and the blue light strobed against it and through it, and the whole room had this underwater quality that I really didn't need on top of everything else. It was shaped like a lung. One lung, not two. Attached to the cooling system by what looked like thick tubing at the base, and the tubes were frosted over and the whole thing was moving. I stood there for probably 4 seconds. That's me. Real decisive. Then I looked closer. Because I couldn't not look closer, and I saw the faces. They were inside the membrane, pressed against it from the inside, the way a face presses against a car window from the back seat. Frozen there. Men, mostly. Different ages, different faces, all of them with their eyes closed and their mouths slightly open. I counted 4 before I stopped counting. There was something about the way they were positioned. Not stacked, not piled, just suspended in there at different depths. That made me think they'd gone in one at a time, over a long time. One of the faces moved. I didn't imagine that. It shifted slow, the features rearranging the way a reflection rearranges in water when you drop something in. And when it settled, it was Torres. The flat nose, the pale eyes, the slack expression. Looking exactly the way he'd looked when he'd handed me the laminated sheet and told me the rules were non-negotiable. He'd never been a manager. He'd been a door. A face that looked like a person so that people like me would follow it inside. That part hit me harder than I expected. Not the horror of it, just I'd known something was off about him. I'd filed it under nervous employer, weird job, whatever. I'd known and I'd walked in anyway because $12,000 and nowhere else to go. That was on me. The janitor was on the far side of the mass. I hadn't seen him when I came in. He was just there, standing at the edge of the mist, gray jumpsuit, no face, holding a mirror out in front of him with both hands, tilted toward me, the way you'd hold a mirror if you wanted someone to see themselves in it. I didn't want to look. I looked anyway. It was me in the membrane. Not a future version, not a symbolic me. Just me, in my flannel shirt and my jeans, my face pressed against the inside of that thing with my eyes closed and my mouth open like all the others. My face next to Torres's face. My face next to 4 strangers I'd never met. I pulled my eyes away. The fire extinguisher was on the wall to my left. Red, standard, the kind you see in every building you've ever been in and never actually think about. I grabbed it off the bracket. It was heavier than I expected, and I almost dropped it, which would have been a real low point. I got both hands on it. I didn't think about what I was doing. That's not me being brave. That's just me not having enough information to be scared of the specific thing I was about to do. I swung the extinguisher into the main coolant line at the base of the mass, the one that looked the most structural, the most load-bearing, the one with the most frost on it. The first hit cracked something. I heard it before I felt it. A sound like ice breaking on a lake, sharp and deep at the same time. The second hit and the line gave. Liquid nitrogen came out in a wide arc and hit the mass directly. The sound it made was not something I'm going to be able to describe accurately. It was loud and wet and wrong. The membrane went white where the nitrogen hit it, and then the white spread, and then the whole thing started cracking from the outside in, slow at first, and then all at once. The faces inside shifted and blurred as the membrane lost whatever shape it had been holding. The pulsing stopped. The building groaned. Not a creak, a groan. The whole structure, the walls and the ceiling and the floor under my feet. Something in the electrical system gave and half the lights went out. The blue strobe cut to nothing. The only light was whatever was left, which wasn't much. I ran. The hallway was dark and the mist had followed me out somehow, or there was more of it in the hall now, and I couldn't feel my feet properly because the cold had done something to my circulation, but I ran anyway. The keycard reader at the exit was blinking red and I slapped the card against it and it blinked red again and I stood there for one full second thinking this was how it ended, locked in a collapsing building in the Mojave with a dead card reader, and then it blinked green. The steel door opened. Desert air came in, and it was warm, and it smelled like dust and nothing else. And I walked through the door and kept walking until I was 20 feet from the building, and then I stopped and put my hands on my knees and just breathed. Warm air. Regular temperature. The kind of air that exists everywhere in the world, except inside that building. I looked back once. The facility was dark. No lights in any of the windows. No hum. No blue glow anywhere. Just a concrete slab behind a ridge in the Mojave, sitting quiet. I got in my car. The engine started on the second try, which felt like more than I deserved. I pulled off the gravel lot and onto the access road, and I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I got to the main road, and I drove north, and I didn't stop. The gas gauge had been on E for probably 15 miles before I admitted it. There's a thing I do where I watch the needle sit below the line and tell myself it's fine. There's always a little left. The gauge is always wrong. That's me. I do that with a lot of things. The Chevron sign came up on the right just before Barstow, and I pulled in, filled the tank with the last of the cash I had in my jacket pocket, and stood there in the dark holding the nozzle while the numbers climbed. The desert at night is cold in a way that surprises you every time. Dry cold. The kind that gets into your collar and just sits there. The pump clicked off at $41 and some cents. And I stood there a second longer than I needed to. Just because the air was regular air and the ground wasn't vibrating and nothing was making any sound except the highway. There was a diner across the street. One of those places with a hand-painted sign and a parking lot that's half gravel. I could see the lights through the window, orange and warm, and a waitress moving around inside. I didn't have much money left, but I wasn't going to sit in the car. I went in and took a booth by the window. The seat was cracked vinyl, red, patched with electrical tape in 2 places. The table had a little laminated menu tucked behind the napkin holder. The place smelled like coffee and fryer oil, and I realized I hadn't eaten in probably a day and a half, maybe more. I'd lost track somewhere around the second night in the facility. The waitress came over. She was maybe 50, hair pulled back, pen already out. I ordered coffee and eggs and toast, and she wrote it down without asking anything else and left. Good. I wasn't in a talking place. I put my phone on the table. The screen had a crack across the bottom corner that I didn't remember happening. I sat there looking at it for a minute. I knew I needed to call Jacqueline. I'd been not calling her for about 2 hours of driving, and the whole time I'd been building up this version of what I'd hear when she picked up, her voice shaking, or no answer at all. Or something worse that I didn't let myself name. I picked up the phone and called her. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Andy? Hey, I said. It's like 1 in the morning. I know, sorry. I looked out the window at the parking lot. You okay? I'm fine. I was asleep. She sounded annoyed the way she gets when she's actually fine and just tired. Not scared. Not shaking. Are you okay? You sound weird. I'm okay. I had a weird few days. I wanted to check in. She was quiet for a second. Did something happen? No, I said. Nothing happened. I just wanted to hear your voice. That landed kind of strange, and I knew it. Jacqueline doesn't love when I get sentimental because it usually means I've done something, and I'm softening her up for it. She knows me pretty well. Andy. I'm serious. Nothing happened. I'm in Barstow. I'm eating eggs. Why are you in Barstow? I was doing a job out near the desert. It's done now. She made a sound that wasn't quite believing me, but wasn't pushing it either. Are you in trouble? No, I said, and that was mostly true. Different kind of trouble than she meant. Has anyone come by your place? Recently? Like in the last few days? What? No. Why would anyone come by my place? No reason. Just asking. Andy, that's not a normal thing to just ask. I know. I'm sorry. I stopped. The waitress set down my coffee and I nodded at her. I had a weird job and I got a little paranoid. That's all. No one came by? No one came by. I've been home all week. I've been watching that Netflix thing about the competitive bakers, which is extremely good, and no one has come to my door. She paused. There was no gray man. There was no anyone. I hadn't said anything about gray. I hadn't said anything about a man. What? I said. I said no one came by. Gray man, no anyone. I don't know what you're worried about. She'd just said it. Like it was a normal phrase. No gray man. I sat there for a second with the phone against my ear and my coffee getting cold in front of me, and I told myself she'd just mirrored my energy, picked up on the weirdness in my voice, and said something that sounded like what I was worried about. That was it. That's what happened. I didn't push it. Okay, I said. Good. I'm glad you're okay. I'm fine. I've always been fine. You're the one who calls at 1 a.m. from Barstow. Fair point. Call me when you're somewhere normal, she said, and eat something. I'm eating eggs right now. Good, she yawned. Love you. Love you, I said. She hung up. I sat there with the phone face down on the table, and I ate my eggs and my toast, and I drank 2 cups of coffee, and I didn't think too hard about anything. The diner had a little speaker in the corner playing something country and low. A couple sat in the booth across from me not talking, just eating. Normal. Everything was completely normal, and I was going to let it be that. I left a tip that was probably too big given what I had left, and I went back to my car. I got in, shut the door, put the key in, and then I looked in the rearview mirror before I started the engine, the way you do automatically, just checking. There was something in the back seat, not a shape, not a person, just a smudge, gray, kind of, sitting in the middle of the seat like a shadow that didn't have anything to cast it, soft at the edges, small. I looked at it and it didn't move and it didn't do anything, and I looked at it for probably 5 full seconds. I'd cleaned out my car before I drove to the facility. I knew what was back there. A bungee cord and an old Patagonia fleece I'd been meaning to bring inside for 3 months. That was it. No smudge, no gray, anything. I sat with that for a second, then I started the engine. I pulled out of the lot and onto the road and merged onto the 15 heading north, and I watched the mirror. The smudge sat there, small and still. When I accelerated, it didn't shift. When I changed lanes, it stayed put. Just sitting there in the middle of the back seat, patient, like it had always been there and had nowhere else to be. I thought about what I'd done in that room. The coolant line, the nitrogen across the floor, the lung cracking open and the whole building going dark. I'd thought I'd ended it. I'd been pretty sure I'd ended it. I hadn't ended it. I'd just moved it. I kept driving. The highway was mostly empty this far north, just the occasional truck with its lights way out ahead. The desert on both sides was dark and flat and went on forever in every direction. I had maybe $400 left, a half tank of gas, and whatever was sitting in my back seat. Oregon. I didn't have a reason for Oregon specifically. I'd just said it in my head when I was driving away from the facility, and it had stuck. North. Somewhere north. Somewhere that wasn't Bakersfield and wasn't a concrete bunker in the Mojave and wasn't a motel room where 2 men had stood over my unmade bed. I kept my eyes on the road and checked the mirror every few minutes. The smudge stayed small, stayed still. I got the feeling. And I know this sounds like the kind of thing a person says when they're losing it, but I got the feeling that it was manageable as long as I kept moving. That stopping was the problem. That the facility had been a stopped thing, a place where something sat and waited and fed. And as long as I was the opposite of that, as long as I was moving and burning gas and covering ground, the thing in the back seat didn't have room to grow. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe I'd figure that out later. I drove north. The smudge watched me from the back seat. The highway stretched out ahead, and I kept my hands on the wheel, and I drove.